This is a presentation on Vincent van Gogh by Ramona Taylor. Vincent van Gogh is a Dutch-born post-impressionist painter. He was born in Holland on March the 30th, 1853, and died on July the 29th, 1890, at only 37 years old. His father was a Protestant minister, and Van Gogh developed an interest in religion at a young age. He even worked for a time as a layman preacher or missionary. It was during this time that he began producing charcoal sketches, although he did not begin painting in earnest until 1880, a short 10 years before his death, at the suggestion of his brother Theo. His brother Theo was one of his closest friends and supported Van Gogh for much of his life. Vincent van Gogh is now considered one of the most influential painters of all times, and his name is recognizable all over the world. He produced over 2,000 artworks, roughly 900 paintings, and 1,100 drawings during the 10-year period before his death. His usual choice of medium for his paintings was oil paint on canvas. Van Gogh had many influences on his art and style. He briefly took painting lessons from Anton Mauve at The Hague. The influence from his time at The Hague can be seen in his light and loose brushstrokes. Van Gogh was also heavily influenced by the period of painting known as Impressionism. From Impressionism, he learned the expressive potential of open brushwork and pure color. However, Impressionism did not leave Van Gogh with enough freedom of expression. This led him to develop his own technique of textural brushwork and strong color to express his emotions more clearly. Van Gogh also spent time studying the form of Japanese prints, whose influence can also be seen in the bold and simplified shapes of his artwork. One of Van Gogh's biggest influences was artist Paul Gauguin, whom he became very close friends with and even lived with for a while. The two artists developed similar techniques of applying paint thickly and using heavy brushstrokes. Even their themes and choice of subject matter were very similar. Gauguin's influence on Van Gogh's works became even more obvious when Van Gogh began painting his paintings from memory, just as Gauguin had done. One more notable influence for Van Gogh was artist Jean-Francois Millet. Because of his past work as a missionary for poor miners and laborers, he identified with the lower classes, much as Millet did. Millet's depiction of peasants and countryside impacted Van Gogh's early works. Later in his life, Van Gogh even produced 21 copies of Millet's work, which shows how much he respected the artist. There are some interesting facts about Van Gogh's life which all impacted his work as an artist, as well as led to his untimely death and subsequent notoriety. Van Gogh suffered from some sort of mental illness for much of his life. It has been speculated that he was bipolar, although that fact has not been confirmed. As I mentioned before, he was close friends and roommates with Paul Gauguin. This friendship disintegrated in 1888 when, after a disagreement, Van Gogh threatened Gauguin with a knife. This altercation ended with Van Gogh cutting off his own ear. Van Gogh's mental illness led him to commit himself to the asylum at Saint Remy de Provence later that year. It was during his time at the asylum that Van Gogh produced many of his most famous and important paintings. He left the asylum in 1890. Later that year, Van Gogh attempted suicide by shooting himself in the chest. He died 2 days later. His brother Theo, whom he was so close to, was devastated by the loss and died himself 6 months later. Theo's widow, who had possession of Van Gogh's works, had them published and released to the world, eventually making Van Gogh famous and gaining him the success he so desperately sought while he was alive. Here are some of Van Gogh's most notable paintings. The first here is called Bedroom in Arles. This is a painting of Van Gogh's bedroom in his home, what is now known as the Yellow House. Van Gogh uses his signature bright and vibrant colors to depict his bedroom in a slightly lopsided representation. The next painting here is one from Van Gogh's Sunflower series, and it is a still life painting of sunflowers in a vase. Here again, Van Gogh uses vibrant color and textured brushstrokes to give the painting life. The first painting seen here is called Café Terrace at Night. Van Gogh used contrasting colors, the darkness of the night and the bright, almost illuminating yellow of the cafe and the bright white of the stars. This was Van Gogh's first painting of a dark, starry night. The next painting here is one of Van Gogh's self-portraits titled Self-Portrait with a Bandaged Ear. Van Gogh painted over 30 self-portraits during his life. This one is famous due to the events that happened just prior to this painting and the story behind it. He painted this one after he cut off part of his own ear after an altercation with fellow painter Paul Gauguin during one of Van Gogh's episodes with mental illness. He reportedly went to a brothel after the episode and gave the ear to a prostitute to guard. He painted this while his ear was still bandaged and while he was recovering from the episode. Again, here you can see his signature expressive brushstrokes. Here we have, in my opinion, Van Gogh's best painting. If not the best, then certainly the most well-known and recognizable one. The Starry Night is a painting of the view outside Van Gogh's room at the asylum at St. Remy. It is reported that Van Gogh painted this from memory, and many believe it is indicative of his mental state at the time. This painting is almost poetic in its representation of a small town underneath the dark night sky. The colors are intense, and the contrast between the dark night sky and the bright yellow and white of the stars and the moon is bold and expressive. The yellow lights from the small town have the same twinkling effect. The slightness of the tiny and quiet town is a contrast to the magnitude and movement depicted in the huge heavens above. Here again, Van Gogh's use of thick, defined brushstrokes give the painting texture, and the swirling brushstrokes give it movement. This painting, for me, defines Van Gogh. It invokes many feelings for its viewers and has been a source of inspiration for many other artists, including musician Don McLean, whose song Vincent, Starry, Starry Night, was inspired by this beautiful painting, and the tortured artist who created it. Sadly, Vincent van Gogh never achieved the success he sought for his art during his lifetime. In fact, he reportedly only sold one painting during his life, which is shown here. After his death at his own hands and the subsequent death of his brother 6 months later, his brother's widow exposed his paintings to the world. His fame continued to grow, most notably after a showing of 71 of his paintings in Paris in 1901, 11 years after his death. He is now ranked among the greatest and most famous artists of all time. Van Gogh's influence lives on and can be seen in modernist art. He has inspired many artists who came after him with his techniques and expressive style. His impulsive application of paint and use of color to express emotions has come to define many modern art movements, including Fauvism, Expressionism, and early abstraction. Artists Henri Matisse, one of the Fauvism leaders, and Jackson Pollock, a major figure in abstract expressionism, are two well-known artists who were inspired by and adopted elements of Van Gogh's style. His influence on modern art and his contribution to the craft guarantees his spot in art history, and his legend lives on.
Now I understand what you tried to say to me, and how you suffered for your sanity, how you tried to set them free. They would not listen, they did not know how. Perhaps they'll listen now. Starry, starry night, flaming flowers that brightly blaze, swirling clouds in violet haze, reflect in Vincent's eyes of china blue, colors changing hue, morning fields of amber grain, weathered faces lined in pain are soothed beneath the artist's loving hand. Now I understand what you tried to say to me, how you suffered for your sanity,